So I am Noah Kaye, and I'm here with Dr. George Patterson. George is a world authority on church planting and multiplying leaders in churches of our day. And it's an honor to interview George, just ask him a few questions. George has been doing this for over 60 years, and we're going to do this short interview with pastors and church leaders in mind. And so, George, what is the most compelling and surprising thing that you would want pastors and shepherds in America to know about what God's doing right now?
Well, I think the greatest truth that really we need to respond to now in this age, all over the world, massive movements are taking place. More people are coming to Christ than ever before in history. And it's miraculous. God is really working. It's in China, in India, many parts of Latin America, many Muslim fields, and it's starting to happen too. But these are not our conventional churches. They're often fostered by our conventional churches, but the movements themselves are quite different. I call it a second track. You know, we have the first track, the church that most of us are familiar with. You know, you have the building and the ordained clergy and all of that. But which is all right, and we're not saying anything against that. Both tracks are legitimate. But the second track is simpler churches. What makes them distinct? Two things. One is they retain the doctrine and the historical identity of the mother church. They retain that. There's no friction there. Secondly is that they no longer require any church activity unless it was required by Paul or Christ or in the New Testament. Yeah.
Okay, so these churches that we're seeing all over the world sprout up are just doing what happened in the early church, in the book of Acts, that Jesus taught, that Paul taught. What are they doing, these fruitful churches, that are different when it comes to worship?
Well, for one thing, they're tiny groups, and the interaction is intense. Over 60 times in the New Testament, we're required to do one another activities, teach one another, correct one another, confess our faults to one another. And this can only happen well in a very small group. So their worship is highly, highly interactive. Well, also, it's family-oriented normally. And children take a very vital part in it. You have more children than adults often, and you give them a role too. They tell Bible stories or they do something important, yeah.
So what are these multiplying churches doing, George, that is different when it comes to evangelism and reaching the lost for Jesus? What are they doing that's different?
Well, the evangelism is quite different from the usual Western typical way, big meetings and all that. No, it's just brand new believers do probably 95% of the evangelism. Just talking to the friends and relatives. And the focus is not on doctrine. They don't get into theology. They don't even know it often. But they met Jesus. They love him. He's often healed them. Or someone in their family or a close friend had been healed, or a demon cast out or something. And they're excited about that. And they sense the presence of Jesus, the living Christ, the risen Christ. They're not all into the systematic theology at that stage.
What about church planting? So how are these multiplying churches actually planting more churches?
Well, except for the first 2 or 3 churches planted in an area, which would be planted by an outsider, highly trained normally, a missionary and so forth, all the churches are planted by brand new believers from a nearby mother church of the same culture. And just, they're not thinking church planning. It's not budgeted. It's just, hey, my grandmother lives over in that other neighborhood, and she's getting old, she's going to die soon, and she doesn't know Christ. Can we go over and talk to her and her friends there? You know, that sort of thing. It just happens. People out of love, reaching their own friends and family.
So, George, in order for this to happen, there's going to have to be some leadership training that is reproducible. How is leadership training happening in these multiplying churches?
Well, now, this is real easy to give the wrong impression here. I taught in seminary at all levels, okay? I'm not opposed to institutional academic training, but on the cutting edge of a movement that's expanding churches, multiplying, that just doesn't fit. It'll kill the movement, okay?
Yeah.
That's where you train exactly as Christ and Paul trained. Mentoring, on the job, working with people. You're doing highly relational modeling of skills, always with an apprentice. And every shepherd, every pastor, every shepherding elder is training their Timothys, okay? And it just flows right along. You take the American frontier in the 1800s, churches multiplied by the thousands across the frontier, the Baptist, Methodist, and so forth. Well, what happened? How did they get their training? Go to a young man, he wanted to be a pastor. All right, he goes off and lives with an older pastor, follows him around like a puppy dog, marries his daughter. It's a laying on of hands, and goes to a neglected community and plants a church. Okay, it works beautifully, this type of modeling of skills, and the way Christ did, the way Paul did it, yeah.
So, George, one more question now. This feels really foreign to a lot of American church pastors and leaders, and because it is foreign. So what would you say? Do we throw out the whole thing we're doing? Do we start something new? What is your heart, your best counsel after seeing this for years, to what churches that want to make disciples should do about this?
We found it just doesn't work to ask a conventional church to change. You tell them they're doing everything. No. Let them do what they're doing, and they're often doing just what God wants them to do. But it's not going to multiply, all right? So we talked to them about the second track. Now, every church of any size has those few eager persons with itchy feet. They want to do something more. And often the leaders and the elders, especially the older ones, they mistrust them because they're always pushing the envelope and they're never quite satisfied and they're griping about way things. All right, release them. Turn them loose. Let them work on a second track. And they'll do it. They'll carry it out. Just don't get in their way. Let them be a little wild and weird. And they're of all ages, too. Wow. And every church has them. They often have the apostolic gifting. Just free them up and bless them and love them and let it happen.
So in closing, George represents a wealth of wisdom and experience in planting churches and has much to offer into that. I represent many of the pastors and leaders across America that may have a lot of these same questions. So I was the wild and weird guy that's now an ex-pastor trying to figure this out. And so George and I just welcome anyone that wants to continue in discussion around this to reach out to us. And we'd love to keep talking, and we have various ways that we can walk with you. So you can do that by emailing mobilizingchurches@gmail.com. mobilizingchurches@gmail.com, and if you send an email to that, George and I both would be able to be in touch with you and walk with you. Anything else, George?
That's it.
Sound good?
God bless
Okay,
you.
bless you.